Coming up from Washington, D.C., the push to privatize air traffic control takes the spotlight on Capitol Hill.
Taking the pulse of the GA industry.
And if you fly IFR in the cold, you want to know about this.
And the Blue Angels over the big game. AOPA Live this week begins from the museum in just a moment.
From your first skyward glance, the dream of flight compelled you. And from your first glimpse of a Cirrus, you realized that dream had a name. Cirrus Aircraft. Go where you've never been before.
We are getting a look at the state of the general aviation industry. Welcome to AOPA Live this week. I'm Melissa Rudinger.
And I'm Tom Haynes. We're coming to you from the museum in Washington, D.C., site of the General Aviation Manufacturers Association's State of the Industry press conference. We'll get to that in just a moment, but the big story today, just down the street at the Capitol. Members of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee heard widely differing perspectives on the proposed FAA Reauthorization bill and plans to spin off air traffic control to a public corporation. Committee Chairman Bill Schuster assured General Aviation that its interests would be well protected.
To be very clear on this, in the business jet community, the general aviation community, there's basically three tranches of them. There's the single piston folks that they're going to pay the gas tax they pay today. We've said we're not changing that. And the business jet folks, the folks that Mr. Boland represents, we've said the same to them. You pay a gas tax, that's where you're going to pay. So that's really unchanged for them. Now, the issue Mr. Boland does bring up, airspace, we have to make sure that the airspace there's access to it. I've got about maybe 3 people that work in the airlines in my district. I've got several hundred GA pilots. I'm a rural area. I have a rural airport. So we want to take care of rural airports. We want to make sure that we don't harm the general aviation community.
But Ranking Member Peter DeFazio had serious concerns and said the legislation shouldn't be rushed.
The ATO is the major stumbling block, and I believe it jeopardizes all of the other work, the essential work in that bill that deals with drones and other safety issues, a whole host of issues, certification reform, which we've been long overdue, which is crucial to keeping our lead in manufacturing and software that relates to aviation in the world. And I fear that this proposal jeopardizes that.
The National Business Aviation Association testified that the system works just fine as it is.
Our members fly all over the world, and so they use all of those air traffic systems. And to a member, they believe that flying in the U.S. Is the best system in the world. But they are very frustrated with other parts of the FAA, the approval parts, the certification parts. We have an opportunity in this bill to address what is broken in the FAA. The air traffic control system is currently, as has been described, the gold standard, and progress is being made moving forward. So I think we're focusing on the wrong part of the FAA in this bill.
But both the General Aviation Manufacturers Association and AOPA say there are some good things in the bill.
So here's what I'm looking at today, and spending the day here with General Aviation Manufacturers Association, which, as well as we do, find some really good things in this bill. And as most of you know that watch legislations, they never end as they start out. So if we have the opportunity to have a good, frank discussion about things that are important to grow and protect the general aviation community, we want to have that opportunity. We'll see where this thing goes.
The bill is scheduled for markup one day after the hearing. That's when committee members will start offering amendments to change some things in the FAA reauthorization bill that will determine FAA's funding and future for the next 6 years.
And the Obama administration released its fiscal year 2017 budget this week. It calls for $15.9 billion for the FAA, including more money for NextGen. And for the second year in a row, no user fees. But that doesn't really matter, because the Republican leaders of the budget committees in the Senate and House both say they won't even grant the administration a hearing on its budget.
Meanwhile, here at the museum, GAMA released the 2015 worldwide year-end aircraft shipment and billing numbers. Not the prettiest of pictures, as we've seen in recent years. Piston aircraft shipments dropped 6.5%, turboprops down more than 7%. Business jets saw a small uptick, with the gains coming in the mid-size category. When asked where future growth might be, GAMA President Pete Bunce had a surprising prediction.
One thing that was so cool to see our conference room full of not only these companies that are researching electric and hybrid propulsion, but all of the other GAMA member companies that want to be part of it. And these are not small companies. So there is a future in this, and if it develops the way we hope, we might see the 1930s again.
You can read more on AOPA.org.
It might get easier to add non-required safety-enhancing equipment to your airplane. AOPA supports a draft policy that is aimed at standardizing the approval process for installing non-certified, non-required equipment that is based on the premise that the equipment offers safety benefits that outweigh the potential risks. AOPA issued the endorsement in formal comments filed in a response to an FAA draft policy.
The fight to keep Santa Monica Airport continues. This is a recording. AOPA and others have filed another Part 16 complaint against the city of Santa Monica. According to the complaint, the city has charged interest rates beyond what the FAA allows. The complaint also says the city has been charging excessive fees. The city of Santa Monica has allowed a non-aeronautical tenant to pay less than fair market rent for use of airport property, denied new leases, imposed short-term leases without justification, and unreasonably delayed all aeronautical lease policies and approvals. So for those of you keeping score, this complaint comes less than a week after a complaint filed in 2016 responded to the city's appeal of an FAA determination that the airport is federally obligated and must remain open until at least 2023. AOPA was also a party to that earlier complaint.
AOPA is fighting for veterans' rights. AOPA and 6 other general aviation groups sent a letter to the House leaders opposing a legislation that would make it harder for veterans to pursue aviation careers. H.R. 3016, the Veterans Employment, Education, and Healthcare Improvement Act, would cap flight training tuition and fee benefits at about $20,000. Coming up after the break, a new ADS-B in and out solution from Garmin, and flying into cold temperature airports.
But first, a look at the Blue Angels flying over Super Bowl 50. You're watching AOPA Live this week.
It's been called the most sophisticated single-engine airplane ever. But to the people whose loved ones are alive today, it's called a lifesaver. The Cirrus Airframe Parachute System, only from Cirrus Aircraft.
Welcome back. You're watching AOPA Live this week, and we're coming to you from the museum in Washington, D.C.
Garmin is providing a new one-box solution for ADS-B out and in. The unit combines a modest transponder for ADS-B out with dual-band ADS-B in. Built-in Bluetooth will share with Garmin Pilot or ForeFlight on your tablet.
The GTX 345 and 335 transponders are really an all-in-one ADS-B in and out solution for customers both non-WAAS and with WAAS-enabled flight decks. There's both panel mount and remote mount options available, so it's suitable for a number of panels and a number of aircraft types.
The transponders provide a simple path to ADS-B compliance. This includes many G1000 equipped aircraft, some of which may need software updates. You can read more about the new transponders under the News and Video tab at AOPA.org.
While having weather information like what ADS-B in can provide you is valuable, the most important weather decision happens before you crank. It's the go, no-go decision. Pilots are usually able to make solid go, no-go decisions when the weather is good or bad, but when weather conditions are marginal, the decision to launch, postpone, or cancel can be tricky. In this WeatherWise video, the AOPA Air Safety Institute looks at factors to consider when the weather complicates your plans.
So, you've done your pre-flight weather gathering, and while conditions are generally in line with the forecast, the weather is right at the edge of your comfort zone, and there are indications that things may be changing for the worse. This is where the difficult questions start. How much worse is it likely to get? How much worse is that than what you've experienced before? Did you feel comfortable in that situation? How long ago was it? Do you feel pressured to go now? What are the costs if you don't go? What are the dangers if you do?
You're flying over the weekend and you need to be home Sunday night so you can go to work Monday morning. You really are motivated to make that flight Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening. And if the weather's not looking that good, a lot of pilots, that's when they start looking for that one forecast that maybe diverges from the predominant thinking that gives them some inkling that maybe, oh, maybe I can make it, maybe I can make it. And then they get up there and they can't make it and they run into trouble.
You can find the full video at aopafoundation.org. Search Beyond Go/no-go.
If you're an instrument-rated pilot, here's something you may not have thought about before flying in cold weather. There are now several hundred airports in the lower 48 and Alaska where there are mandatory changes to your approach procedures when the temperature gets really cold. It's a regulatory change that's been in place since September. AOPA Live executive producer Warren Morningstar talked to an expert.
When you fly into extreme cold temperature, your altimeter will indicate that you are higher than you are actually flying. This can put you dangerously low to obstacles and terrain, especially when you're flying an instrument approach procedure in IMC and you may not be able to see this terrain or obstacles.
Rune Duke is AOPA's expert on airspace and air traffic control, and we put him in our Redbird FMX flight simulator to see what happens when temperatures get really cold.
As we fly this ILS approach into a Michigan airport, failing to make the temperature correction, the glide slope would actually lead us to a much lower decision altitude than we were anticipating. Rather than breaking out at 200 feet above the airport, we could be breaking out significantly lower, despite what our altimeter is telling us. At this point, a pilot would think they're significantly higher, but as they descend, unless they were looking out the window, they would not see the terrain closing very fast.
You can find the list of cold temperature restricted airports in the Notices to Airmen publication. It's online. The list is updated every 28 days. Now, the other thing you'll find there is the ICAO cold temperature error table. Now, you'll need to have a copy of that for your pre-flight planning and in the airplane. And if you see this snowflake on your approach plate, you need to apply an altitude correction if the surface temperature is at or below what you see on the plate.
An example of how significant the error can be for your altimeter is at Pellston, Michigan, for example. If you're required to make the correction, which would be at negative 22 degrees Fahrenheit, your intermediate segment would require a correction of about 350 feet. This is a significant difference, especially if you're thinking you're flying at the correct altitude. It is very important that you make these corrections.
Now, you still fly the glide slope, but your decision height needs to be adjusted. Now, you don't have to tell ATC about a change in your decision height altitude, but you do need to tell them if you've changed the altitude on an intermediate segment. That's so ATC can continue to provide adequate separation. So remember, when it's cold, look out below. Warren Morningstar, AOPA Live.
You can learn more about this on AOPA.org. Search cold temperature altitude correction. Finally this week, GA goes NASCAR. Textron is joining forces with JR Motorsports, Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s team. Drivers Alex Bowman and Cole Custer will have the Cessna brand on the number 88 car for 6 races. You can see it during the NASCAR Xfinity Series this year. The Citation Jet brand is known for speed and efficiency, 2 things that NASCAR relishes. So, Melissa, a lot of NASCAR teams use general aviation airplanes to get around. They're very popular with the teams.
Yes, and I love the synergy of the industries.
Yep, helps them get around.
Well, that does it for this week. Thanks for watching. I'm Melissa Rudinger.
And I'm Tom Haynes. We'll be back in Frederick next Thursday. See you then.